Thank you, Alicia. Members, could I ask you all to stand, please? It's a minute's silence in respect of Ukraine. We are all witnessing the war in Ukraine as it unfolds. So before this meeting commences, I would like us all to hold a minute's silence to show support and pay tribute to all those who have lost their lives and for those families facing unspeakable challenges from the horrors of war. I'd just like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Council. I am Councillor Adrian Osborne, Chairman of Babergh District Council, and I will be chairing this meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. Could I also ask you to please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting, you are also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council members of the public, the Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Can I move to the agenda, please? Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Grandon, Councillor Maybury, Councillor Gould, Councillor Malvisi and Councillor Busby. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Declarations of interest by councillors. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. Move on to item 3, BC 2134, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of February 2022 for accuracy only. Are there any issues with accuracy? Could I have a proposer, please? Jan Osborne. And the seconder, please. Sue Ayres. Thank you. I will now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. As this is a consensus vote, we will do it by show of hands. All those in favour, please. Thank you, Chair. That is carried.
Thank you. Item 4, BC 2135, announcements from the Chairman and Leader. I refer you to paper BC 2135 for noting. Thank you. I would also like to take the opportunity to remind you of the Chairman's fundraising dinner on behalf of the Chairman's Charity on the 13th of May 2022 at Hindlesham Hall. Tickets can be purchased via the Civic Secretary, Karen Sayer. Thank you. I I'd like to invite Councillor Ward to make his announcements.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'm pleased to say I don't have much to report about COVID this time. Fingers crossed, although infection rates are very high, it does seem to be much less of a threat now that we have effective vaccinations and other therapies. And we really can look forward to a better year. And, of course, see more of us working back here in Endeavour House. I won't say too much about the terrible events in Ukraine at this moment, as we have a motion to debate later. However, our councils will do everything we can to support the Homes for Ukraine scheme in line with the guidance provided by the DLUHC. It is essential that this scheme is a success and that we can house as many refugees as possible. We will support our residents and communities so that they can offer those fleeing the Russian atrocities the warmest welcome to the UK. As you know, the LGA peer review team visited us last week. Now, I'd like to thank those of you who have participated in the focus groups for giving up your time, and I hope you found the sessions worthwhile. The reviewers spoke to over 200 people, members, officers, and external partners, which gave them plenty of material for their task. They felt that everyone really engaged with the process, and they particularly enjoyed their visits to Sudbury and Stowmarket. The feedback we have got so far is overall positive, but, as expected, there are things that we need to focus on that need improving. You have been sent the presentation with the initial findings and recommendations, and a full report will be published soon. I attended the Spring DCN mini-conference in London yesterday. It was well supported by representatives from around the country, as well as senior government and opposition MPs. It was good catching up again with colleagues on a lovely spring day. Stuart Andrew, the new Minister for Housing, gave an update on what we can expect from DLUHC soon. He said that we could expect an announcement about the local plan process, another announcement about expanding the availability of planning resources and skills, and also enhance the compulsory purchase order powers. He tackled some probing questions about housing targets and local need, permitted development rights, empowering councils to build, particularly to deliver affordable and social housing, and financing to invest in infrastructure ahead of SIL receipts. Also use of right-to-buy receipts, and, of course, problems with the planning inspectorate. There was also an excellent panel discussion about revitalising high streets. This addressed a number of themes, including the lack of enough public funding, the need to include private partners, and therefore the need for robust business cases. And we also heard that some councils had made good use of Section 215 notices to protect assets at risk where the condition is harmful to the area and to tidy up land and buildings. And it was good to hear from others and to know that we are all, irrespective of political control, facing the same challenges and looking for the same solutions. Thank you, Chair.
Item 5, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with Council Procedure Rules.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, questions by the public in accordance with Council Procedure Rules.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And item 7, questions by councillors in accordance with Council Procedure Rules.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. I'd now like to go to item 8, BC 2136, Overview and Scrutiny Committee Report. And I would like to invite Councillor McLaren to introduce BC 2136, which is for noting.
Thank you, Chair. Due to the brevity of the report, because it was a call-in situation, and the length of the agenda, if you've got any queries, I would welcome them by email. I will not be discussing this paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Clarence. Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Is everybody, all members, happy with putting their questions to Councillor McLaren in an email? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item 9, BC 2137, to review of the governance model operated by Babergh District Council. I would like to invite the Monitoring Officer to introduce paper BC 2137. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, councillors. This report is the culmination of the work of the Constitution Working Group following the request by the Council to explore the pros and cons of the committee system and the Cabinet model of governance. The members of the working group were Councillors Plum, Busby, Jameson, McLaren and Malvisi. Some of the key issues that the working group took into account when considering the best model of governance for Babergh were the role of all councillors in decision making and their ability to represent their communities, ensuring that all decision making is transparent and accessible, engaging members of the public in decision making and ensuring that decisions and the reasons behind them are communicated, recognising that there are good points about both the cabinet model and the committee system and wanting to capture the best bits of both, and making sure that the governance model is efficient and workable, particularly in terms of the workload of councillors and the number of members actually available to occupy seats on committees. During the all-councillor briefing on the governance model options, councillors asked me to prepare and cost some options for different committee systems. I have included some examples in Appendix A to the report. However, it is quite challenging to accurately cost these options as there are so many variables in terms of the number of committees, their size and the frequency of meetings. However, what I have included are the statutory requirements of a committee system and some key assumptions in the appendix. If the Council does decide to implement a committee system this evening, we will work with councillors between now and the annual council meeting in May this year to determine the right structure for Babergh. The full council then has the reserved power to choose which committees it wants to appoint and to appoint members onto those committees and elect the committee chairs and vice chairs. Finally, Chairman, I would just like to raise the issue of timing, which is something the working group discussed at length. If the Council decides to adopt a committee system, then the Council is locked in to that model of governance for a period of 5 years. This means that the next Council to be elected in May 2023 would be bound by that decision. If the Council decides to stay with the Cabinet model and implement some or all of the proposed enhancements, then the Council will retain complete flexibility to revisit the committee model at a later date. I'm very happy to answer any questions on this report, Chairman, and would ask for a proposer and seconder for one of the options contained in the recommendations section. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to propose recommendation 3.1A, which is essentially leave things as they are with no change at the moment. It will allow us to implement some of the recommended changes and then for the next council in 2023 to make a final decision based on how those changes have worked in practice. The report we've got in front of us in section 4.7 does show some of the clear advantages of the cabinet model, and I believe those advantages still stand. We've got also in 4.15 of the report.
Sorry to interrupt the leader. Can I ask, I wanted to ask the question of the monitoring officer because she's just outlined one or two things. Can't we do that before we get into debate?
I'm not in debate, actually. I'm just making a
proposal then. You're making a proposal. No, I want to ask a couple of questions of the monitoring officer on what she's just said.
I'll finish this.
Yeah, can Council just finish what he has to say?
Yeah, I'm nearly done, Chairman, nearly done. I am, however, mindful and sensitive to some of the issues reported by the working group as outlined, particularly in paragraph 415 regarding engagement with backbenchers. And to that effect, we've already implemented some changes to how council operates, but also you'll see at 4.18, paragraph 4.18, there's some proposed changes to the cabinet model. And I firmly believe that they're given the chance that they will prove to be very effective and improve that engagement significantly. And therefore, that is why I wish to propose that recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Before I go to monitoring officer, could I have a seconder, please? Clive, Councillor Arthur. Thank you. Emily, would you like to?
You're welcome to take questions now, Chair.
Oh, right, yeah. Right, we're into questions now. So the questions will be 3 questions per member, and they must be relevant to the subject under discussion and must be a question. Thank you.
So we have Councillor Beer first.
Councillor Beer?
I didn't realise we were limited to 3 questions, but anyway, I couldn't hear actually who you said was on the working panel. I did catch Mary McCann's name, but my question really was, who were they? How were they appointed or selected? And was this open to everybody? That was my first question. I have got others. Thank you.
Chair, I'm happy to answer that question. So the members of the working group were Councillors Plum, Councillor Busby, Councillor Jameson, Councillor McLaren and Councillor Malvisi. And the Constitution Working Group, sorry, I've got Community Governance Working Group in my mind as well. The Constitution Working Group is appointed by full council at the annual council meeting.
And I'll keep the third one after I've heard some of the other things. If at the end of this debate we wanted a recorded vote, will we be able to do that, or are you going to tell me that we've got to do it via the electronic system? Because I don't ever remember voting for that. I'm under the impression that we can have our names called out and we can state which way we wanted to vote. But I'm sure you're going to tell me that this isn't allowed now, and I don't know when and how this was ever changed. Thank you.
So it's absolutely possible to request a recorded vote, which is 5 councillors need to make that request. And then it's at the chairman's discretion as to how that recorded vote is conducted. So we can use the modern.gov system because that obviously provides a form of recorded vote in any case, which is published alongside the minutes. But if the chairman so desired and the council wanted it, you could have a roll call style of recorded vote.
Under the circumstances, I feel that the electronic vote will deal with the problem of who voted for what. So there is a recorded vote there already. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question for the monitoring officer is, we received an email from you saying that if we had any questions on this paper, we should ask you first, and you would answer them before the council meeting. How many questions did you receive, and what were they? Because the whole purpose of having a paper presented to council is that the questions are asked, and everybody on the council hears the questions and knows whether they're relevant to what they're thinking or anything else. So that's the first question.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably worth me actually just saying the reason for asking you if you would like to pose any questions was to give you an opportunity to ask any more detailed or technical questions that you might have ahead of the meeting, which of course could equally be repeated in the public forum, because of course the process of asking questions and having answers is really important for the public's understanding of this issue and this report. I don't know whether this is a positive or a negative, but I received 0 questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next question is concerning the timetable. We were previously told that if we voted for a change in system today, or originally it was going to be January, that it would come into effect at the next annual council meeting, which is in May 2022. Is that a statutory requirement that it comes in at the annual council meeting, or can it come at any time? Because if that is the case, then of course if we postpone, in inverted commas, the decision tonight and stay with the status quo, then it'll be 2 years before anything can happen, not 1 year.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. So it's a statutory requirement that any change to the governance model can only be made at the annual council meeting, or come into effect at the annual council meeting. So if you made the decision today, it could be effective at the earliest point from the annual council meeting 2022 this year. You could, of course, choose to make a deferred effective decision as well. If you don't make a decision, the next opportunity to alter the governance model would be in May 2023.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton.
And just to clarify, that would mean that it until May 2024?
No, it could come into effect in May 2023. So you could revisit the committee model decision after 6 months from today, effectively, so that the 6 months rule is passed. You could then make a further decision about reverting to a committee system, and that could be effective from the annual meeting in May 2023.
Thank you, Emily. Are there any other questions, please? Councillor Hardacre.
Which one do I press? This one. I've got a technical question on this. The members of Cabinet, my understanding is they receive an allowance on top of their standard allowance for participating in Cabinet. But is that not a financial benefit of being a Cabinet, and therefore should they not be declaring an interest in this vote and not taking part?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. All councillors have a dispensation to participate in discussions about governance models or about allowances, because of course it's not fixed who the Cabinet members might be. So anybody in this room could potentially be a Cabinet member, and therefore you all have a dispensation to allow you to participate in this kind of debate.
Thank you, Emily. Any other questions? Sorry, Councillor Hinton, you've had your 3 questions.
I thought I'd only had 2.
I've counted 3.
Never mind.
Am I allowed to make another question, Chairman, or are we stifling debate?
Carry on.
Questions? Based on that point, Monitoring Officer, bearing in mind that the Cabinet system is, in the inverted commas, gift of the leader of the Council, does that not rather sort of take the rest of the Council out of who gets the allowance and who doesn't?
Thank you, Chair. The leader can choose from any member of the council to form their cabinet, so it doesn't exclude anybody in that regard.
Are there any other questions for the monitoring officer? Councillor Barrett. Are there any other questions of the monitoring officer? Okay. Thank you for that. I shall now proceed to the debate, and councillors will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes and once only. Who would like to start the debate? Councillor Lindsay. Sorry, too big a pardon. I get you two mixed up.
Thank you, Chair. I will vote against this because I'm in favour of a committee system. I feel we haven't. You just need to look at a list of procedural disasters that have happened with the Cabinet system so far. I mean, from my point of view, I'm sure it wouldn't seem a disaster to some members of other parties, but it is a disaster for democracy when you have the Greens being elected with the second largest vote after the Conservatives, the third largest party after the Conservatives and the Independents, and them being excluded from John Ward's cabinet. Just to put it on record, yes, Jane was asked by Councillor Ward to be on the cabinet. She said, give me a day to think about it, and when the next day we were told no, that offer's been withdrawn. So we have never, in the duration of this council, been asked to join this lovely rainbow cabinet that Councillor Ward is proud of calling it. So it doesn't work in that regard. We also, there's talking about things that went wrong. We just need to look at Bellevue. First we had the Premier Inn disaster, all decided in Cabinet. Then we have the kind of lack of debate really about the choice of tender for who's going to develop on Bellevue Park. There's we've had the people arguing in a pub, cabinet members arguing in a pub about car parking, U-turns over car parking, threatens to sue people, talks of people being threatened in a pub. I don't know why you're looking baffled. This has been an email that's been shared to all councillors. So it's actually been bringing the council into disrepute. The answer that we're given, the fig leaf that we're thrown is we'll make it a more kind of open cabinet by having advisory panels. Well, it doesn't work. I can tell you this was tried by the Conservatives actually at County Council some time ago. They tried to have advisory panels. The problem with advisory panels, it's neither one thing nor the other. And the members of the Cabinet will not want them to be in public. They will not want the minutes to be publicised. They will not want the agendas to be publicised. So they're not proper decision-making bodies. So everything will be done in secret on advisory panels. So what is the point for someone like me or a backbencher in the Conservative group
Thank you very much.
to put
Councillor
forward
Lindsay.
their view
Thank you.
if it's in secret?
Who else would... Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just first of all draw members' attention to paragraph 4.15 of the report, and that therein lies one of the major problems with the existing system of cabinet, in that the other ordinary members of the council, those who are not within the gift of the leader, feel left out of things, and I think that's why I should be voting. One of the reasons why I should be voting against this proposal. I think that it's spurious to say that if we make this decision, we're locking the next council in to that decision, because there is no reason at all why we couldn't have changed things not quite before the 5 years, because we've got that 5-year lock-in, which is the wonderful part of local government which stops us from doing what we want to do. But there's no reason at all why the next council shouldn't have to wait the same as this council has had to wait to get rid of the cabinet system.
Thank you. Councillor Melanie Barrett.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support option A, the leader and cabinet model, because one of my reasons is because of the number of councillors that we now have in this council. It's lower than it was when we had this model previously, and I don't think that we can really successfully fill all the committee places. But also, one of the reasons that has been cited as the problem that this is supposed to address is the lack of engagement from the backbenchers. But at recent cabinet meetings that I've been to, there's been very few councillors there. So if that is the problem, then there is an alternative way to address that, and that's the model I am going to be supporting. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thought I'd give members the benefit of my experience, having been on 2 cabinets, but also knowing the committee system as well. In 2017, when the cabinet system was brought in, it was not great for the first year. Then Councillor John Ward took over as leader, and he made during that time a pledge that he would try to make it more inclusive, and he invited an independent to come on. I was asked if I would join. There was a big debate among our group, and I know others, whether I should or not, join the enemy, as it were. But my thought was, be in among it, try and make a difference, say my piece, which I did. Had a good portfolio with basically customer services, fantastic team, fantastic people, and I was really pleased with the things we were able to get done in that time. At the same time, it was a year of squabbling all among the Conservative members themselves. John showed his leadership, so the following year when he asked me again if I would join following the election when I was re-elected, asked me again, but obviously it was more inclusive this time because the numbers had changed. Clive and John got together to put together the cabinet, but I was more than happy to see John as a leader because I think he's a good leader. I think he's hamstrung at times by his own members, but you know that's the job he has. I totally agree with Councillor Lindsay. You know, especially after the first year, we should have had a Green on board. The mechanics of that, I think he has a slightly different version of how we all saw it. But either way, yeah, a Green should have been appointed at some point. And then the cabinet itself, I thought was absolutely superb. Some great cabinet members on there when there were 8 of us. And then there was another squabble among the Conservative group, which led to John, and I'm well aware this is true, being forced, if you like, or certainly manipulated, threatened, whatever you want to call it, into bringing 2 more Conservatives onto the cabinet. That meant a very good Conservative colleague lost her job as on the cabinet. She wasn't happy with the way she was treated by the Conservatives, so resigned, and then came to the Independents, and we were more than happy to nominate her, to ask John to put her on the cabinet as an independent. And so Liz Malvesi carried on with half the portfolio from before. Part of the dispute was Liz, along with John, had introduced a reduction in the free parking from 3 hours to 1 hour. And they had introduced that. The Independents, along with Dave Busby from the Lib
Councillor
Dems.
Davis, the time is up.
Is that okay?
Thank you.
There you go.
Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dawson.
If I may just correct that, I would just like to say that the microphone's on. I'd just like to say Councillor Ward certainly wasn't forced into making any decisions with regarding bringing new members on. Both Simon and I have our own businesses, and it's not something we would particularly really relish. It's a lot of work, and so I'd like that to be corrected.
Thank you. Thank you. That's enough. Councillor McCraw.
Point of order, Chair. Is a member not allowed to make his assertions without them being contradicted by another member? Simply, otherwise we go into Yarboo sucks, which I think, frankly, is a little bit beneath us.
I think, members, I think we're here to debate the possibility of a change of the committee or the cabinet role. So I don't want to get into personal details and working on the assumption that somebody is wrong or somebody is right. So can we just stick to that, please? Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to take part? Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think the Cabinet's remote from us and from the general public. And that goes on both sides of this chamber. Disappointed, Mr. Chairman, that you can veto and not allow us to have this vote. I don't ever remember voting to give you those powers, but apparently we must have done somewhere along the line. So I have to accept what you've said. But this just goes to show how we're ignored, the backbenchers. And I'll pick up some of the points that different members had commented on. You know, I had a motion for car parking, which got through this council, and I'm still waiting to be involved in it. I was told there was some chap called Bruce, who we had the phone number. I contacted him, still waiting to hear from him. I've never heard or seen of any of these officers come to Great Cornard, where I could have shown them around the district, around the area, my area, where we got these problems, where some of the solutions that we could put into place. That's never happened, so there's been no involvement. I think a member opposite tried to take comment or credit on the car parking. charges. Look at that fiasco. Had that came to a committee, most likely it would have been thrown out there and then. It certainly wouldn't have ended up like it did, where it went backwards and forwards and one member had the right in the end to decide to do it or not. Didn't listen to the voices in this chamber, because it was quite clear, unless you'd got blocked ears or something, it's quite clear that the members present, lots of them, were against this charging. And yet it still thundered on as though it was the right thing to do. That was a fiasco, Mr. Chairman, nothing else. So to suggest that, that this cabinet system is better is wrong. It works when there's a complete majority of one party, whether it's this side or that side. It works then. It doesn't work like it does at the moment. Antisocial behaviour, that was another thing that I've constantly argued for, and we're still doing nothing about it. There is still no great movement on that, and no involvement of us members who've got these problems in our areas. And it's not just confined to my area, it's throughout the district. But we should have been involved, and we're not. And to suggest that we keep your elite cabinet in opposition is wrong. I know, my time is up.
Thank you very much.
I'm well aware of that.
Thank you, Councillor Beer. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure about elite. I've never felt particularly elite. However, like Councillor Davis, I've been on both sides of this equation, both in committee system and cabinet system, and I've had the unique opportunity of having chaired scrutiny during a cabinet system and having seen how pathetic scrutiny was under a committee system. There's no doubt about this, by the way. You just look at the Constitution, the powers of scrutiny and the importance it holds. Since then, I've gone on to become a member of that cabinet, so I've seen cabinet from both sides, scrutinising cabinet and being on that cabinet and being prepared to be scrutinised. I wasn't originally in favour of cabinet. I've stated this on many occasions, but having seen it in operation, and I would have said under John Ward as leader, I think it was effectively being run very well. The introduction of independent in the first case and the possibility of other members being involved, what we perhaps call the Rainbow Coalition. I have to say I've never regarded this as a coalition. It's a supply and confidence arrangement. We will supply as long as we have confidence. And that's my personal view. I've stated that before. I think we are not in a position to make changes that will affect the next council in 2023. We need to see what that election result produces. Making a decision now will commit that council and all council for 5 years. I don't believe it's appropriate for us to do that today. We should defer it as long as we can, which I would suggest is probably in about a year's time, ready for the next election. It may be that it's a decision the next council wishes to make, and let's be frank about it, none of us know what the makeup of that council might be politically. So we'd be basically second-guessing and committing people that really won't have had a say in it. I don't think that's appropriate. I will be voting for option A.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I find myself in a curious position where I'm agreeing wholeheartedly with what Councillor Lindsay has said, but also picking up some points that Councillor Beer has raised as well, Chair. And coming to a point specifically that Councillor Beer stated, was that Cabinet works especially well, in my opinion, where you have a thumping majority. And if I'm not mistaken, Babergh District Council has only enjoyed that situation once since its inception in whenever that was, 1973. So I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Lindsay, actually, that whilst no model of governance is perfect, actually the committee system is the better system for Babergh District Council. However, that said, I also agree with Councillor McCraw down here that it is not for this council to determine how the next council's governance should feature. That is for the next council. There's many in here that may not be returned at that council. It is not for us to determine next council's governance model. It is for them when they're returned. So I will be voting for option A. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Arthey, do you wish to speak? You've already spoken, I'm afraid, Councillor Hinton.
Point of information, Mr. Chairman, for Councillor Beer. If he'd been at the ONS yesterday, he would have seen that there were 36 CCTV cameras between Hadley and Sudbury to control antisocial behaviour, amongst other things, but there was no consultation as to where they went.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody that hasn't spoken wish to speak in debate? Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. We are all made aware of any cabinet decisions because we do get an email telling us, so we have the option to look at those. And the other thing is, we are all elected to represent the people that voted for us, taking party political things out of it. And I agree with the part that you said about, we cannot change this because we don't know if we'll all be here in another 14 months. So I will go with the option that John suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ayres. Right, that's the debate. I would now, thank you. I would now ask the Corporate Manager Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Chair, you haven't gone back to the proposal.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Ward. Do you wish to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I do actually. Just a few points. I'm very happy with the membership of the present cabinet. I have brought in some extra members for very specific reasons. I did separate the environment portfolio because it was huge, and I felt that climate change, biodiversity, sustainable transport needed a portfolio in its own right. So I'm happy with it and stand by those decisions. The points that Councillor Beer has made about parking and antisocial behaviour, sorry, but a lot of progress has been made on both of those things. Speak to Councillor Dawson on parking, she will give you that update. There's been plenty of opportunity for members to engage on both of those subjects. And finally, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Councillor Lindsay has said. I'm not going to comment on what goes on behind closed doors in a pub when people have a drink and get together and have a chat. But I will say that I dispute his assertions about how those advisory panels that we're proposing are going to work. We can quite easily make sure that the proceedings of those are made available in terms of formal minutes, but also his allegation of the use of the word secret. We do not and never have had secret meetings at this council. They are not allowed. We have confidential meetings, but we never have secret meetings. Nothing is ever done in secret. So please do not make that assertion because it is not correct. I won't add anything else. Everyone said everything I would want to say and agree with concerning the proposed recommendation. So thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Wars, and apologies for not allowing you to come back straight away. So I'll now ask the Corporate Manager Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now showing in blue for option A for you to cast your vote. Thank you. Has Councillor Beer left the meeting? Yeah. Right, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So the vote is 18 for and 8 against. And that vote, just for clarification, will be shown on the website tomorrow morning.
So that is carried. That vote is carried. I'd now like to go to 10 on the agenda. Is it 10? Item 10, BC 2138. Members, please. Code of Conduct for Councillors. I would like to invite the Monitoring Officer to introduce a paper, BC 2138. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to introduce this report which asks the Council to adopt the new Model Code of Conduct as its own local code of conduct. The Model Code was developed by the Local Government Association following the recommendations made by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. The new Code of Conduct is accompanied by a set of guidance which gives greater clarity to councillors and complainants about the scope of the code and the definition of behaviours which would be in breach of the code. If the Council agrees to adopt the new code, it will come into effect from the annual Council meeting in May 2022. There will be training for councillors on the new code, the format of which is currently being considered by the Suffolk Monitoring Officers Group. Currently, the same Suffolk Local Code of Conduct has been adopted by all tiers of local authorities across Suffolk, which has significant benefits for councillors who are members of more than one council. We intend to maintain this approach and will be recommending the adoption of this new code to town and parishes in our area. I'm happy to answer any questions, Chairman, and would ask for a proposer and seconder for the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Hurren. A seconder, please. Councillor McCraw, thank you. Right, we're going to questions, and a reminder that I will only have 3 questions by each member. Who is it?
Councillor Parker.
Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Question for the monitoring officer, if I can. To what extent, please, with regards to the declaration of local non-pecuniary interests, it's shown on page 59 for members, it's items 7, 8 and 9. To what extent do the disclosure rules for non-pecuniary interests differ from how they are now? Because I'm conscious that you mentioned the word clarity. Having read it, I would suggest that it offers anything but, actually. So could you explain how those rules differ, or how they're proposed to differ as to how they are now, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the current system of pecuniary and local non-pecuniary interests is based on the wording that's contained in the Localism Act 2011. The recommendations of the Committee for Standards in Public Life were that there should be an additional category of interests which were other disclosable interests, and that captures things like positions of trust, so trustees, directorships, management positions on outside bodies, charitable groups and things like that. So there is a section in the guidance document that accompanies this report that talks a bit more about that, but I think it's one of the very specific things that we will need to provide some training on for all of us to really have that thorough understanding of these are the categories of things that you need to declare, and these are the under the legal system, and these are the additional things that you will need to declare under our own local arrangements.
Any other questions? Councillor Dawson.
Yes, to the monitoring office. I just wonder whether, can you provide clarity regarding Code of Conduct and members' external roles for us? I know they're doing that in Parliament as well at the same time with the LGA. And I should just like confirmation that treating fellow councillors with respect includes members' roles or subsequent employment outside the immediate council business, but potentially influencing it.
Thank you for the question, and if I may answer that, Chairman. The current code that we operate, and indeed the new revised code, are both very clear about the capacity test. So a councillor has to be acting in an official capacity to be captured by the Code of Conduct. That doesn't mean they're not regulated perhaps in a professional capacity by some other regulatory body. Now, the new code differs slightly because it changes the sort of presumption around whether you're acting in a personal capacity from you have to prove that you're not acting as a councillor to you're likely to be presumed to be acting as a councillor unless you can prove otherwise. So it kind of changes the emphasis in terms of if it's very clear to an ordinary person that you are only making that comment or acting in that way in an official capacity or because of knowledge that you have as your role of councillor, it will be captured by the Code of Conduct. Interestingly, the government have just published their response to the recommendations made by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And one of the things that the committee recommended was that when operating on social media, councillors should always be presumed to be acting in an official capacity. And the government's response says, actually, no, we're not going to accept that recommendation because we need members who are in elected office to be able to differentiate between their personal views and the views that they hold as a councillor. So the government have actually said that they're not willing to go as far as saying that all social media activity would be presumed to be in an official capacity. So that's to give you a flavour of how that works.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. A question to the monitoring officer. My concern is around parish councils. Having discussed this with them, I was aware there was a dearth of knowledge about the existing code of conduct. Recognising there is a system for the support of parish councils, I am concerned that it's not sufficient. Is there anything that we as a council or as members can enable and empower this new code of practice amongst parish councils? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And that's a really good question. We're currently working very closely. So the Suffolk Monitoring Officers Group, so all the monitoring officers across Suffolk get together and discuss matters of interest, and particularly those of us with town and parish councils have been talking in depth about the training that we'll provide for town and parish councils that choose to adopt this new model code, and we're working very closely with the Suffolk Association of Local Councils on that. So there will be training in a variety of formats. Some of that will be face-to-face, some of that will be e-learning, some of that will be virtual training sessions. And we're also looking at how we can use the fantastic resource we have in all of you as spokespeople for the District Council in taking that message out to your town and parish councils as well. So we will be furnishing you with information so that you can talk to town and parish councils about that, as well as the support that comes centrally from SELC and from each of us individually as monitoring officers.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor McCraw.
I just wanted to make an observation, in case members were unaware of this, that this was subject to a consultation, I think, a couple of years ago, and many members were involved, in fact, in making their responses as to what they thought a revised code of conduct should include. And all I can say is that, I mean, codes of conduct, if you just look at the Nolan principles, everything else falls from that and follows from that. Basically, a code of conduct is just reminding you to do what you should be doing anyway. And if you follow those basic rules, I don't see an issue. The detail, we have a monitoring officer who can advise on those things. And I think there will need to be training, there's no question. This is a little more complicated than the previous Suffolk Code, which I've been spending a lot of time looking at recently.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, just a quick one. Follows on from what Councillor Parker said about how this is supposed to clarify issues around interests and behaviour. I just wondered, has it clarified anything with regard to Freemasonry and disclosing interests?
Thank you, Chair. There is still no requirement for elected members to declare membership of Freemasonry or any other friendly societies. It is a requirement for officers, interestingly, but not for elected members.
Any other questions? That is the case. I'd like to now move into debate. Council will only be allowed to speak once for 3 minutes, and this will be timed. Who would like to start the debate? No debate? Well, Emily, do you wish to add anything?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And who was the seconder? Do you wish to say anything?
I would say something if I was waiting for other people to...
Oh, right.
A bit of unnearing one. I will just say something, yes.
My apologies.
That's okay. Just to say, Chairman, this paper came before Audit and Standards at the last meeting that I chaired in January. We asked many questions that have been asked tonight, but at the end, we gave it a good, thorough examination and were happy with it. We were a bit concerned about capturing and covering some of the things that go on at parish council level, because we are aware there are 1 or 2 hotspots around on that, but then we don't judge them anyway. But we thoroughly backed it. There's lots in here that we thought were better, capture more things, so we backed it to the hilt and would advise everyone to do so tonight. We obviously don't judge our own, that goes to other people, but it's what everyone in Suffolk is signing up to, so we will judge other people on this model. So thoroughly recommend it. It's a good piece of work, Chairman.
Councillor Hurren, and apologies for
It's
not
all right.
allowing you to speak as a seconder. I'll now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Problems as well. Oh, it's not coming up. So could you try again? Thank you. Chair, that is 24 for and 1 abstention, so that is carried.
That is carried, members. Thank you. I'd like to move to item 11, BC 2139, Community Governance Review. And I refer to the updated Appendix A in the table papers. And I would like to welcome Edward McCready, Corporate Manager for Electrical Services, to the meeting to answer any technical questions that may arise. I'd like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce paper BC 2139 and to move the recommendation in the report. Thank you, Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to introduce paper BC 2139, the proposal for a community governance review this year. The Council is required under the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007 to periodically carry out a review of the boundaries and governance arrangements for the parish and town councils and unparished communities within the district. It has been some time since this was last done, about 20 years ago, and we are required to keep our area under review every 10 to 15 years. There have been a number of requests from parishes for a review, and so we have deemed it appropriate to conduct a district-wide review now. The terms of reference are provided in Appendix A, and together with the report, explain the rationale, purpose and timetable for the review. The review will start on the 1st of April and will be completed by December, with any new arrangements coming into force before the elections in May next year. The report proposes that the review will be conducted by the Community Governance Working Group, which comprises Councillors Norman and Parker, supported by the Electoral Services team, and the group will report its recommendations to Council. So I propose the recommendation in this report. Thank you, Chairman. Seconder, please.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Thank you. Right, questions and debate. We'll now move to questions. And once again, councillors may ask up to 3 questions. However, they must be relevant to the subjects under discussion and must be a question. Thank you. Who would like to start? Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick one really concerning this report. Is it possible to have a copy of the report where it makes it clear that this is about electoral boundaries and not parish boundaries? Because I believe that parish boundaries were instituted many, many years ago, whereas this is to do with electoral boundaries and the size of parishes concerning electoral boundaries and not effectively changing or renaming parishes as per the ancient books of law in the country.
Could I ask Councillor McCready to answer that technical question?
Thank you, Chair. This is about all local government parish structure and town council and parish structure. So technically the boundaries can be changed or merged. Some councils in circumstances where somebody wants to take into a housing estate or remove an area, as opposed to an ecclesiastical parish.
Any other questions? Councillor Arthur.
Better. Yeah, I'm really pleased with Councillor Parker being on the group, but I don't actually remember nominating him. So I'm not quite sure how the group was. I've just tried to find out when we actually put this group together. All I could find was reference to Mid-Suffolk needing one, and we didn't at the time, which was 2 or 3 years ago.
Any other questions? Oh.
Did you want me to answer that?
Yes, go on. Yes, sorry, Emily. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. That's also a working group that's appointed at annual council.
Anybody else? Question? Councillor Lindsay.
Thanks. Yeah, just can you clarify why we're having one now? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I inherited this when I joined the council in October. It's something that's been outstanding, and it's a matter I took up with the monitoring officer and chief executive when I arrived. It's something that it takes time to do, and that means we would have new structures in place ready for the elections in 2023. So it hopefully refreshes and takes us forward for the next 15, 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. McCready. Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Chair. Would this review actually cross boundaries from district to district? So could we actually lose a parish or gain a parish or a town? Be nice.
We cannot go or change district boundaries or electoral arrangements. It's purely the parishes and the local community government arrangements inside the district boundaries.
Councillor McCraw.
I just wanted to confirm my understanding. This concerns civil parishes, and I think the word parish often confuses people. Words parish councils, parish churches, parish boundaries. They often coincide, I just want to correct that I'm absolutely right here. So the civil parish and the ecclesiastical parish might have exactly the same boundary, but in this instance, my understanding is that that's not necessarily the case. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm not an expert on ecclesiastical parishes, and some of them, as you know, date back to times well before ourselves. But in terms of civil parishes, this is the boundaries we're looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That clears up the question that I put earlier on. But another question that I've got, it says following a number of requests from parishes for a review, who's actually asked for the review? We've got 80 some odd parishes across the district, and yet we're doing a review of the whole district. How many parishes have actually asked for a review?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I don't actually have that information to hand. I've had contact with one parish meeting that's requested a review a number of times, and a couple of parishes have informally contacted us about electoral arrangements.
Thank you. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to emphasise the point that I think Councillor Ward said at the start, that we are obliged to carry out a review on a regular basis, and we are overdue that review. So even if no parish council had requested it, we'd still have to be doing it. But as Mr McCready has already said, that isn't the case. We have got requests as well that will need to be picked up. Of course, as you find with any changes, and councillors may recall when we made the changes at the district council level to wards, if you make a change in one place, it has a knock-on effect on other places. So it's easier in many regards, albeit it's a bigger piece of work, to look at the whole rather than only looking at subsets of any part of the district.
Councillor Hurren.
Thank you, Chair. I understand this is to go to all of our, I think it's 78 parishes. Is that correct? I have to say, I find this difficult to understand what's actually being asked. Is it the physical boundaries? You know, could Boxford say, look, we'll have half upholstered, or is it that sort of request? Is that what we're actually asking? This thing is about name changes. Maybe Mr. McCready can help me, because to be honest, if this lands in 78 parishes, I think all the district councillors will want to know more, because we're going to get a lot of questions. And I, for one, I'm not sure what the answers will be. So I think we need a bit more clarity of what this is offering. Is it just boundary changes, name changes? We need a lot more clarity here, Chairman, we really do.
Thank you, Chair. The review allows the Council to make decisions on all aspects of community governance, the boundaries, the electoral arrangements, whether a parish or town council is warded, whether a parish meeting is allowed to form a parish council, whether parish councils wish to merge. There's a lot of flexibility. At the moment, it's a blank canvas to us. We're not preempting any ideas, but we'll be writing to the parishes to invite them to come up with suggestions or recommendations which they feel would represent efficient government or local government or community governments in their area or their parish.
Any other questions? Okay, so I'd now like to go into debate, and once again, councillors will be allowed 3 minutes and to speak, and once only. Thank you. Who would like to start the debate? Fair enough.
Councillor Ward want to come back?
Yeah. Councillor Ward, do you wish to add anything?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So I shall now go to the vote, and I'll ask our Governance Officer, Civic, to actually conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Councillor Nunn, are you able to vote? Okay, can I take your vote manually, please? Thank you. Chair, that is 21 votes for, 1 against and 3 abstentions.
Thank you very much. That is carried. I'd like now to move to item 12, BC 2140, designation of the Section 151 officer role. And I would like to invite the Chief Executive to introduce paper 2140. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening again, councillors. As I'm sure all councillors are aware, the statutory positions in the council of Section 151 officer, monitoring officer and head of paid service have to be appointed at full council. They are within your gift. And as I know you definitely are aware, our current Section 151 officer, Catherine Steele, is due to retire at the end of April. And I'm sure you won't miss the opportunity to thank her again, as you have in the past, in terms of the work that she's done for the council. But what that does mean, as you would expect, is that we've been out to recruit to replace Catherine, so to appoint to the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources. That was an exercise carried out by Penna Executive Recruitment on our behalf. It was a comprehensive process that involved candidates not only applying but producing their own video and then going through a series of technical interviews, stakeholder panels with other finance officers from other partner organisations, a panel meeting of councillors, a panel of the senior leadership team, and then ultimately an interview panel as well. And as a result of that, as you no doubt will have seen with him working together, Melissa Evans was successfully appointed as the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources. But tonight, you are therefore asked to not only accept her as that appointment, but add to that in terms of formally appointing her as your Section 151 officer as well. And so I'd ask for a councillor to propose and second, if I may.
Councillor Barrett.
Oh, I'm here. Don't know what happened there. I've moved to the right. Some would say impossible. It gives me great pleasure to propose Melissa to this post. Having worked with Melissa over the number of years, it's been great to be able to see her career development and also to ultimately end up as our 151 officer. So, and I'm looking forward to sorting out next year's finances with Melissa. We've already started that task ahead of us to make sure that Babergh is not the pauper anymore compared with mid-Suffolk. That's a task for you. Anyway, so that's my proposal. So vote for her, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ward.
I would be delighted to second this. I was on one of the interview panels and Melissa put in a very strong performance. She was an excellent candidate and I'm sure she'll make a brilliant 151 officer. She's got a hard act to follow. Catherine has been a wonderful 151 officer and I've enjoyed working with her in my position as leader but also as a previous finance portfolio holder. And I'm sure Melissa will step up and will fill those very big shoes. I support everything Councillor Barrett has said as well. So, welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Does anyone have any questions or anything to say on this appointment? If not, I intend to move straight to the vote. Right. I shall now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Chair, that is 25 votes for. That is unanimous.
It's a bit of a crunch moment for Melissa. Can we give her a little round of applause?
Yes. Melissa, I'm glad to inform you that that is carried. And welcome to the job of Section 151. It's nice to have you there. And obviously, I'd like to give my wholehearted thing with Catherine on the years that I've known her and what she's done. You've been magnificent. Thank you. Where was I? BC 2141, Pay Policy Report. Before this item commences, I will ask members of the senior leadership team, apart from the Chief Executive and Catherine Steele, to leave the meeting while the item is discussed. This evening, I would also like to welcome Steve Davis, Employer Services Specialist from London Councils, to answer any technical questions, and I would like to welcome him to the meeting. Now, I would now like to invite the Chief Executive to introduce paper BC 2141.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening again, Councillors. So, Councillors, you will recall that you considered a report very similar to this, not the same at all, but very similar to this, back last September, and there was a lengthy debate in this council chamber, and ultimately that vote was lost, so the proposals were rejected. At that time, I, alongside the other senior leadership team, couldn't be in the room, so just by way of explanation as to why myself and Catherine are able to stay tonight, that's because I've specifically asked the leader, and he's agreed to remove any reference to myself from the report, so there are no recommendations in relation to me as Chief Executive. And as I've already explained earlier in the evening, Catherine Steele is leaving us at the end of April, so she's no longer conflicted in terms of being able to hear to support, although I notice she has disappeared from the room, so hopefully she will come back shortly. In terms of the report itself, as I say, you had a lengthy debate at the time, in particular arising from that debate and also through further conversation with Mid-Suffolk councillors. The report at Mid-Suffolk, just for reference, if you weren't aware, was withdrawn following Babergh's rejection of the proposals. But outside of the meeting, as you know, there's been lots of conversation in each of your group meetings and via email in order to try and tackle some of the concerns that were raised both in this council chamber and beyond as a result of that report. You'll recall that as a result there were approximately 23 different issues, I think it was, that were raised by a combination of councillors, and actually following the various discussions I think that rose to more like 27 different issues that were raised by councillors. Each of those we have sought to address within both the covering report that you have tonight and in addition to that within the ILGA, East of England LGA, appendices that you have with you. And just by way of explanation as to why Steve Davis is with us this evening, unfortunately Michelle Kirk, who wrote the original report, has suffered a bereavement, so she's not able to join us. And so Steve has very kindly stepped in to be here this evening if there are any technical questions. And we also have Suzanne Hughes, who's our head of HR and OD, if there are any specific HR questions that you may have. That was all I was going to say, but I think it might be useful if I just take you briefly through the recommendations themselves, and then if there are any questions, more than happy to try and support you. You will, I know, be familiar with the recommendations because they have been discussed outside of the meeting in advance. So the first two recommendations, and I will be brief, I promise. The first two recommendations are in relation to salaries themselves. That's the salaries of our directors within the senior leadership team. That's recommendation 3.1 and 3.2. The recommendation in terms of salary scales follows what was proposed back in last September by the East of England LGA, but what has changed as a result of several comments made by lots of councillors on both sides of the chamber is in relation to the number of spinal points that form that grade. As you may recall, East of England LGA recommended 3 spinal points. You were much more comfortable with 5 spinal points, which is what the current arrangements are. And I should say in relation to pay, one of the reasons why this needs to be looked at this stage, not least in terms of the current market position, but we've found ourselves in this situation because those pay scales haven't been reviewed for upwards of 10 years, nearly 11 years now, since those scales were last reviewed. Clearly, for each of those officers, there have been some inflation-related pay rises in that time, although you'll also appreciate that's been a time of austerity, and in some years that was a zero inflation, so there was no actual increase in those salaries. I'll return to that briefly when I get to recommendation 3.7. Recommendation 3.3 has then asked me to look again at the job titles. That's something that I'm more than happy to do and to have enshrined within here. You will know that we try and make sure that we have job titles that are meaningful, not local government nonsense, so they actually describe what the person does on the tin, rather than something that's possibly out of date or slightly meaningless. And what's also important is that we make sure that we've got job titles that not just bespoke to Babergh, but are relevant in the wider local government sector. Particularly important, obviously, when we're coming to recruit people, and also so that those officers can get their foot in the door when they're trying to negotiate or engage with other partners. Unfortunately, it is still the case where status in terms of job title does help you get in the door at times. Recommendation 3.4 is then to not limit this review specifically to the senior leadership team, but to go beyond and look at the rest of the workforce as well. I know that's something that lots of councillors have raised. I too think that's absolutely critically important. It wasn't included within the original report back in September because, bluntly, it's something that's within my gift to do already. I don't need your permission to make that happen, but I know councillors wanted to see that enshrined in there and specifically wanted to see a timescale put onto that. So you'll see recommendation 3.4 now confirms that that will happen and will happen by a certain point in time so that that affects the rest of the organisation. But what's important in order to enable that to happen is to create the financial headroom that isn't possible at the moment, because under the current scales, each of those officers bumps into the next grade above. If you do approve this tonight, then that will create some headroom to be able to carry out that wider review. Recommendation 3.5 is then adding to that, or in addition to that, is again a recommendation that came from councillors themselves, and again I wholeheartedly agree with, which is in relation to our pay progression arrangements. So at the moment, if an officer is going to progress up those spinal points that I described, those 5 spinal points, then in essence they will do so if they've been here for an extra year and that they're not performing badly, i.e. they're not under some form of special measures. What that means by default is that if you're just performing all right and you've been here another 12 months, you would progress up that increment scale until you reach the top, and then you would stop. And I don't think that's right, and I know councillors have said that they don't think that's right either, that if there's going to be progression in terms of increments, it should be more directly related to good performance, not just okay performance. I don't think there's any suggestion within this recommendation, and nor do councillors, from what I've heard, think that we should have a formal performance-related pay scheme in the kind of private sector sense of the word, but a much closer alignment to performance compared to what we have today. And so what's proposed within that recommendation is that that would happen for the senior leadership team. And then, as you will have read within the report, if relevant, if appropriate, that could be rolled out more widely as well. But that's not the commitment that's within the report tonight. 3.6 is the formal bit of business, which is we are obliged, or you are obliged on an annual basis, to approve a pay policy statement, and so you have within the appendices that pay policy statement tonight, and we need to make sure that we do that, as I say, on an annual basis. It was introduced by the government several years ago. And then lastly, 3.7 builds on that and what I said earlier, which essentially says, notwithstanding the requirement to look at the pay policy statement on an annual basis, that you also would look to do a detailed review of those salary scales at least every 4 years. And the reason being for that if you don't do that, then there is the potential to get yourself straight back in the situation that you found yourselves in now, whereby it hasn't been reviewed for 10 years and in effect has built up a prolonged problem. So by reviewing it every 4 years would hopefully avoid that build-up or that potential build-up. So those are the recommendations, councillors. As I say, they have come from your own discussions and those at Mid-Suffolk as well, although I have to say there was a lot of alignment in views both cross-party and across the 2 councils. If there are any questions, more than happy to try and answer them, either myself or through colleagues for you. And of course, like the previous report, if you're so minded, somebody else will need to propose and second this. Clearly, it's not something I can do.
Thank you, Arthur. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Ward, and the seconder, Councillor Jameson. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to say an awful lot, just that the Chief Executive has made reference to the 27 issues that were raised by groups and individuals, and the fact that each of those issues has been addressed and has now worked, that the measures to address those issues have worked their way into the report, means we do have a much better report before us now than the one we had before. A couple of points that the Chief Executive has raised, and I just wanted to reiterate. I'm very pleased to see a much greater emphasis on performance in this. I think it's very important for this to have the credibility that it needs. And also, the other point that the Chief Executive mentioned was the need for headroom, so that will allow us to do a full review of all of the grades below the senior leadership team. So I think this is a much better report, and one that we can support this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. Councillor Jameson, do you wish to speak?
Not at this stage, Chair, but I will come back at the end.
You reserve the right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll just now move to questions and debate, and we will now move to questions. Councillors may ask up to 3 questions each. However, they must be relevant to the subject under discussion and must be a question. Thank you. Who would like to start? Councillor Barrett, Melanie Barrett.
Sense of deja vu. Thank you, Chair. Start off just with a couple of points I've noted from the policy. There is the reference to, firstly, I would say I'd agree with the proposal. It can be helpful in tying incremental progression with good performance. Will that progression depend on meeting your performance targets or exceeding your performance targets?
So that hasn't been finalised. The commitment here is to then look at that. I'd be interested in councillors' views as to whether or not it should be meeting or exceeding. I think it would be normal practice that if you are meeting your targets, that would be result in progression. But of course, a lot of that will also depend upon how stretching those targets are in the first place. And that will be absolutely critical because if those targets are set, dare I say, too easily to reach, then they become meaningless again. So we need to find the right balance between stretching targets and sensible targets. We also will need to factor in, of course, external elements to that. None of us predicted having a pandemic and what that might do on your targets. But of course, we look at performance-related issues on a regular basis, not just once a year. So that could be built in as well. It's not something that's definitive at this stage, but I also think it would be sensible, if we're going down this route, to build in direct engagement with councillors as well. As you appreciate at the moment, all of the directors are either directly line managed by myself or by the strategic director. That wouldn't change, but in assessing their performance, I don't think it's right that only one individual would be assessing their performance. I think that would naturally make more sense to be broadened in terms of that reflection, things like 360 reviews, and I think it would be sensible to include councillors' opinions in that as well. At the very least, conscious of the vote that you had earlier, at the very least I would expect that to include portfolio holders, the relevant portfolio holders, but it may well go beyond that if that's something that councillors are interested in doing. Clearly the balance that needs to be struck here is not making it too bureaucratic. Certainly what I don't want to get into, for example, is a situation whereby a decision is made and then there's a whole system of appeals, for example. That would start to undermine the whole purpose of this, but I think everyone would sign up to the concept that it should, as I said, and thank you for Councillor Barrett for supporting, it should be more directly linked to performance. But lots of that for discussion, interested in councillors' views, of course.
Thank you.
My second question. This report mentions about 4 or 5 times the need to remind us that this is public money. Where is that addressed in the report?
not sure it is directly addressed depending on what you mean by that. So absolutely right, enshrined within our pay policy statement is the need, and I haven't got the wording exactly in front of me, but I can find it if necessary, is to strike that balance between paying what we need to pay based upon what's fair and reasonable to pay for the work that employees are doing, based upon their performance, but also based upon the market rate, so to speak. But a recognition, exactly as Councillor Barrett has said, a recognition that this is taxpayers' money, and therefore that needs to be factored into the equation rather than simply being running around spending the money with no acknowledgement to the fact that it's taxpayers' money. The assessment that the East of England LGA have done for us has focused on what are those benchmarks. What does the world look like out there, particularly in the Eastern region? What is the, in effect, if I call it this, the right salary for the nature of the jobs that we have? So they have focused on that element. It's for councillors, I would say, and that's why it's mentioned several times within the report. It's for councillors to then do that assessment in considering the recommendations as to whether or not that balance has been struck correctly. But clearly that's not a right or wrong, black or white situation. It's a judgment that you will need to find as to you think, have we got that balance right in terms of the investment of public funds versus having the resources to be able to deliver the priorities that you wanted to see us deliver.
If that's all right. There's a commitment to review the remaining 570 staff in a reasonable timescale, I guess. If this is approved, has any thought been given to the cost of that, given that a certain percentage of that will result in an increase, I would imagine?
So, absolutely right. I would anticipate that there's no point in us doing the review if everybody's salary comes back as being exactly the same as it started. Of course, things can go up and things can go down in that regard. The review, and Suzanne may want to comment on it or just nod when I say this, it isn't something that we would be able to carry out in-house, as you'd expect. We don't have the resource sitting there ready to do a complete review of 570 odd staff. That would be something that I would suggest we bring in order to hit those timescales, so we bring in some additional capacity to help us with that. But I would anticipate, having been through similar experiences in other authorities in the past, that actually what you will be presented with, and it will be you that will be presented with this, is not a definitive, there you go, here's the answer. It will be options, because there won't be one simple solution. It will be a series of options for you. The timescales work very well, completely by chance rather than by design, because I would hope to get those options to you ahead of setting the budget next year. So you would have those options in front of you before you get to the February full council meeting, and therefore you could consider the cost implications of any changes alongside setting the budget, assuming, of course, that you wished to implement it from the 1st of April the following year, so 1st of April 2023. If you do that on those timescales, then you would have set aside the money and you would have known what you were doing, and you've done that through the budget in a very straightforward and logical ordering, so to speak. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Barrett. I would anticipate there are financial consequences. Clearly, they're not yet known because we haven't started that work. That would follow from this, and I think that probably fully answers the question.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. I actually believe in competitive pay in a competitive world, so I will be supporting these recommendations. However, I think increase in pay brings the increase in responsibility, and I'm pleased to see the emphasis on performance. I think we all have to be measured as to how we perform, and I think that applies to the officers as well. But I'm going to ask you a question that I was asked by the peer review group, which I couldn't answer, and that was, are there corporate competencies in this establishment and in this council? Thank you.
Yes, we already have a suite of core corporate competencies that we assess people by on an annual basis. That's both their performance, but as we said, this would strengthen it in terms of directly aligning to pay, but it also stretches into values and behaviours as well. So not just have they delivered the outcome that was set for them, but how did they go about delivering that outcome? Was it done in the right way, not just achieved for the sake of it, as it were. So yes, absolutely we do. They're not static. Then again, they're not things that just stay set in stone because the world keeps changing. And again, I suspect they are things that, in fact, I think they're on the in the people plan. They're one of the things that we want to look at as well. It's scheduled in, not as directly as part of this work, but just on the basis we need to make sure that those are always up to date and appropriate for the modern local government world, as opposed to what would have been possibly appropriate in the past. So the short answer is yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Michael Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you've alluded to where the answer would be for my question, but the pay scales, as I understand it, have been reviewed by the East of England Local Government Association, and you're looking at comparable rates of salary for the jobs they do. But how does this compare with other areas of the public sector? I'm focused on one area from my background, the armed forces, and what's been proposed here, you're looking at an assistant director being on a similar pay scale to an officer grade 4, lieutenant colonel, in charge of 550 plus personnel. Strategic director is in 1-star general sort of level of pay. So how does these local government suggested rates compare to other areas of the public sector, please?
I think I'd have to bow to your expertise in relation to the comparisons to the military. I suppose the first thing to note is, and sometimes confused, particularly for the public, local government isn't the civil service. So local government officers are not civil servants, so there isn't a direct comparison that you can do across, for example, even to the Department for Communities and Local Government, as was, because there isn't that direct comparison across. We do know, and it's within the report, that if you do the comparison, say, with the health sector, we know, because we've tried to recruit less than 12 months ago, that we are behind the salaries in relation to the health sector, and this would bring it up, if this is approved, would bring it up to about comparable. But it is very difficult to do compare and contrast across the wider public sector, because clearly the roles are very, very different. So the East of England LGA haven't tried to do that. I wouldn't suggest for 1 minute that that's what you've got before you tonight. What you've got is very directly a comparison against our sector as the local government sector in terms of the Eastern region and beyond. And yes, you're right, you will find differences if you were to look, as I say, if you look to police, if you look to armed forces, or if you look to the health sector as being the obvious other bits of the public sector. Of course, there are other elements as well. So this report doesn't attempt to do that, nor, and I might try and bring in Steve here, it may want to comment in terms of what normal practice is, not such for normal practice for Babergh, but normal practice within the sector as a whole. So, Chairman, if I can bring in Mr. Davis.
Yes, I would concur with Arthur that other organisations or local government I've reviewed paying a number of London authorities in the past, and predominantly we look at our local market, which is local government, for comparison and identifying what the appropriate levels of pay might be, because that's predominantly the sector that you're fishing in, if you like, in terms of pool. Obviously, you're looking to attract sometimes people outside that sector, but in terms of actual pay, the reference to determining pay arrangements, you look within your own sector, and that's what the East of England LGA have done, and that's included in the report. And I would just add that I did some of my own comparison from wider benchmarking on other districts in the South East and West Midlands, because I'm privy to that information, because I manage a metric service that does information for those regions as well, and the East of England LGA information concurs with that wider pool of metrics as well.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Councillor Fraser.
Yes, just if I can come back to that. So just to confirm, so what the East of England LGA is proposing is pretty much on par nationally?
Certainly within this part of the country, And compared to South East and West Midlands, I can concur that that's comparative, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Any other questions? Then I shall proceed to go to the debate, and once again, councillors will have 3 minutes, but only speak once on that, and that will be timed. So who would like to start the debate, please? Councillor Barrett, Melanie Barrett.
I can't resist. Well, I think I have some sympathy with the predicament of having to ensure that we are competitive. We've got to attract the right people to but I think the increases proposed are a bit excessive. And this is really a problem for a number of reasons. Because we could be embarking on a much larger increase, as we've just been discussing in questions, if we embrace this review across a significant number of people. We're just talking about 9 people in this review. We've got 570 other staff. You know, what are we embarking on here? So can we afford it? It is a bit of a concern, really. Can we actually afford this? It's for another reason as well that I think the excess it troubles me, because if we agree this, it pushes the prospect of our chief executive's salary is going to need to be elevated, because his strategic director there'll be overlap with his salary and his number 2. So really that's not a situation that you would normally have. And excuse me for taking a little swipe out, but it's interesting that in the report our offices are described as modern and beneficial to attracting staff. Perhaps they don't need £250,000 spending on them then. So if we agree this, we could be responsible for creating an exodus from other councils to come and work for Babergh. They'll be keen to do that. Putting pressure on our fellow, our neighbouring councils to perform exactly the same review that we're doing. And are we going to then end up in a sort of a upward pressure on neighbouring councils for the next couple of years? Who is the winner in this? I believe this proposal is too excessive, so I won't be supporting it, I'm afraid.
Councillor McCall.
I'm a little confused, Chairman, to hear that this looks as though it's a ridiculous amount of money. According to the paper, 9.1 states that our combined salary budget is 21.2 million. That's the combined budget for everybody. And the increase in cost over the period, including on costs, annual financial impact will vary from 5,848 to 18,288, because we can only consider what's in this paper, not the future pay review that may be coming forward once Arthur's got that done by the end of, I think it's the end of the financial year 2023. So if we just take what's in front of us in the paper, then we don't see a great increase. In fact, the previous paper didn't have that great an increase. And the fact of the matter is, one interim appointment costs us more than another chief executive would. We don't want interims. When we get an interim, we spend a fortune on them. This is designed to help us avoid having to get interims, because we haven't got enough candidates coming forward at the money we can pay them. So I'll be supporting the paper.
Thank you, McCall. Councillor Simon Barrett.
I think there needs to be a clarity about interim. An interim is there to replace an officer that is not in post. So to infer that an interim is excessive over and above is actually slightly incorrect. An interim obviously is a cost that would be replaced. So yes, there is additional cost, but it's not the enormous cost that's been portrayed by Councillor McCraw. So I think that needs to be taken into account. It's slightly alarmist, I think, because obviously when you have interims, they are there to replace. We have one interim at the moment, which is there because we couldn't recruit. And the reason we couldn't recruit is if you look at the job, it's made up of 4 employers, and who wants to work for 4 employers? It's bad enough working for 1. So I think the job description was probably wrong. It didn't attract the right number of people, hence we've got an interim in that post. But is that interim actually much more expensive? Probably not in the long term, because there are on costs that interims do not have, Councillor McCraw, in terms of the pension contribution, which equates to 33%. So we're not paying that. So I think you need to take that into account without your slightly alarmist views on interims and slightly inaccurate ones. Thank you. Councillor Michael Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to encourage a bit more debate on this because I'm undecided. I'm open-minded, rather. I haven't decided which way I was going to vote on this. And I'd like to really understand the wider views of the council on this. Is it affordable or not? So I'd really encourage debate. Thank you.
Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things that really I would like to get clarified to a certain extent in my own mind as well. Recommendation 3.4, that subject to approval of recommendations 3.1 and 3.2. I can understand that if we elevate the lower members of staff, they're going to bump into the upper members of staff's salary unless we push the upper members of staff up. But the review of the pay structure across the whole workforce shouldn't be dependent upon what happens to the upper members of staff. It should happen anyway. Whether it's implemented or not should then be the matter for discussion. But we shouldn't be almost blackmailed into approving the upper members of staff so that we can improve the conditions for lower members, especially when we have just waited 10 months to give them their agreed pay increase. The other point I would like to cover is the fact that we've heard about local governments, a different organisation even to the civil service, to the health service, to the armed forces, and therefore we've got to fish in the local government pool. Well, not necessarily. If we fished in the armed forces pool, from what our colleague on the other side of the chamber's been saying, we'd be quids in. We'd get a 1-star general for the same sort of money as we're getting an ordinary sort of person, if you like. So we should be expanding our recruitment so that we don't end up with this same few people chasing high salaries around the local government sector. If there's more competition there, we'll get good performance from officers and good value for money. And that's what we should be looking for, because as it says in the report, we've got to remember this is the public's money.
Councillor Davis.
I find myself in the unusual position of agreeing with both Councillor Hinton and Councillor Barrett, Melanie Barrett, of course. The points that have been made about the ongoing increases, especially within the local government area, you know, it's a bit of an analogy in terms of football transfers and footballers' wages. You know, that just increases because it's a relatively small pool of players available. The difference is, of course, they have sponsorship, they have TV deals, and they have billions coming in from rich overseas owners. So I think we need to be careful about doing that. I think they're not here, but I think our officers do a fantastic job, and I would love to see them get more money. But I think we have to be realistic. And exactly as Councillor Hinton has said, you know, maybe we need to look outside that pool a little bit. And the other thing is in-house training. We've just appointed Melissa, we've just promoted Melissa And that's exactly what we should be doing. You know, promoting from within, gaining those experience, whether it's from the NHS, the armed forces, or other sectors as well. My biggest concern, though, is where the increases go, it leaves the junior officers and those middle officers behind. That gap gets wider and wider. You know, and appreciate we have to deal with unions in terms of the officers and the government saying it's just 1% or 2%. But especially in the current climate, I think I'd really struggle, as much as I'd love to give our senior officers more money, I'd really struggle to actually do that.
Any other questions? Councillor Holt.
Thank you. I don't have a problem with paying people what they're worth. And from what's been said tonight, it's gauging that performance and their worth to us as an organisation. But that's if we can afford it. And from what I've seen over the 7 years I've been a councillor is the increase, the continual increase of the salaries, of the wages, the budget, and the percentage of what we actually have spent on that wages budget. Each year it seems to go up and up and up. And there has to come a point where we draw a line and say, can we actually afford what we're proposing? So I would actually support this, but I would urge us as an authority, as a council, to seriously consider having a cap and giving the Chief Executive a budget to spend on wages and keep them within that budget and running the authority with that cap in place. Because I can see the continual increases that we have will gradually be higher and higher and higher, year on year on year, and it's going to cause us a problem in the long run. As I say, I think, similar to Councillor Davis, I think our officers do a fantastic job. I think they should be rewarded for that, and that reward should be what the national pay scheme offers. And from what we've heard from Mr Davis, certainly what we're proposing is within that locally and regionally. But I think we do have a bigger issue here long term about what we can actually afford, and I think we seriously need to consider that as an authority, but I will be supporting this paper.
Thank you, Councillor Holt. Any other questions? No, debate. Oh, debate, sorry. Councillor Creswell.
If it's legally possible to have a cap. I know that isn't with football, after someone mentioned about rich footballers, so even in this instance, I don't know if there's anything you could do to have a cap. I don't think you could do that.
Thank you, Councillor Creswell. Any other person wishing to take debate? Oh, Councillor Jameson, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to say it's dreadful that we've got ourselves in this difficult situation we've left 11 years to review our senior management team, and it's good to see that we're not going to be doing that in the future. I understand what a lot of councillors have said here about it being expensive and can we afford it. And when we first came here a few months ago, it looked to me a huge pay rise for our directors. And I'm pleased for the explanation. It doesn't seem to be now that anyone's going to get more than about a 3% pay rise. Now, I know that's still going to be difficult for residents to accept, but I do think we need to do it on this occasion. I will be supporting it, and I'm happy to see that, and I hope we do look at the rest of the members of staff. There is going to be a full pay review going forward over the next year, and I don't think that needs to be forgotten. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Councillor Ward, do you wish to come back? Is there anything you wish to add?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Just a few things, actually. We're not actually chasing upwards. We're just trying to maintain parity with some of our neighbouring councils because we are falling behind. What we've got proposed is affordable, is in the budget. Yes, it might initially give us a wider gap between the senior levels and other staff, but we are going to be filling that gap. It gives us headroom to fill that gap in the review of all pay. But I think one of the questions we've got to ask is, if not now, then when do we do it? We've already said that we're falling behind. And so we need to really think about it. The issue about recruiting from within, that's really not really relevant. It's not mitigation for not paying our officers the right level for the job. And as several of us have said, they do work very, very hard and do justify it. The interim issue is a significant one. Interims do cost. They can cost anything from 600-700 up to 1,000, 1,200, maybe more a day. And the fact that we had to recruit an interim in the Communities AD is testament to the fact that we are struggling to recruit. So we do need to bear in mind that interim cost. I think that's probably, the only other things, a couple of things I wanted to say. I know there's some reference to the Chief Exec's salary, and that is outside of the scope of what we're proposing this evening, but there isn't an overlap between his salary and that of the Strategic Director, so I don't think we need to worry too much about that. And finally, I know there's been some reference to footballer salaries and wages, but quite honestly, that's kind of offensive. We know that footballers are ridiculously overpaid, and I don't think there's any comparison really with our officers, our senior leadership team, that works very, very hard, and for salaries which, as we have seen, as we have evidence, are falling behind their comparable salaries at other councils locally and further afield nationally. So I think that it's the right time to do this. It's affordable, and we will see the benefits of that. So I'm fully in support of this, and I think it's time that we do this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Chief Executive, do you wish to... Oh, sorry. Well, you've spoken once, I'm afraid.
Well, it's to clarify some information.
A clarification? Fine, okay.
Yeah, just looking at the proposal is for the Strategic Director's pay to be increased to 120, but the bottom of the Chief Executive's pay might not be the current salary that is received. The bottom point is 118,000. Isn't that correct?
No, it's been uplifted following the last inflation rise. So the bottom of that salary is actually slightly higher than the 120.
Right.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Chief Exec, do you wish to add anything? I shall go to the vote now. So I ask our Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Okay, thank you, Chair. The votes are now in, and the voting is 16 for, 5 against, and 4 abstentions. So that report is carried.
Sorry? Well, it's entirely up to you members. Do you wish to go through? Yeah? Okay.
We've got to get the others back.
Yeah. Yeah. Catherine, can you So now move to item 14, BC 2142, decisions taken by the Chief Executive under delegated powers in accordance with Part 2 of the Constitution. I would like to invite the Monitoring Officer to introduce paper BC 2142, which is for noting.
Thank you, Chairman. The Council is asked to note the schedule of decisions taken by the Chief Executive under delegated authority. One of the decisions grants an extended leave of absence for Councillor Grandon due to ill health. There are two decisions which relate to urgent actions that were needed to enable the Council to respond to the increase in the Omicron variant of the COVID virus earlier this year, and the final 5 relate to the making of neighbourhood plans in a number of areas following successful referendum results. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I'd now like to go to item 15, Councillor appointments. Do we have any changes? Councillor Ward? No. Okay. So we get to item 16, motions on notice, and I refer to the motions on notice in the tabled papers. 16A, to consider the motion on notice received from Councillor Ward. Councillor Ward, would you like to move your motion? Could I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I would like to move the motion as it's presented in the agenda supplement papers. We all know what's going on in Ukraine. It's appalling, and there has been this is a standard motion that a number of councils are proposing and voting on. Just to reiterate that Babergh District Council is immensely troubled by the horrific devastation in Ukraine and the escalating humanitarian crisis facing the country. And in the light of this, and as a way of expressing support for members of our communities who are from or have ties with Ukraine, this council condemns the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine and stands in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and their families and friends, including those local to Suffolk. It also stands ready to provide support to those affected by this war and will open our arms to people displaced and affected. And finally, we will work with and support the efforts of our local communities to provide help and comfort to those in need. Thank you, Chairman.
Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Zach Norman, would you like to speak? Reserve your right.
Well, of course, we all know what's going on, and as Councillor Ward has already said, I think we would all agree to stand in solidarity with Ukraine here, as it's all been written in the papers. So yeah, no, I'm very happy to second this. Thank you.
We'll now move to debate. Councillor Hinton, what do you wish to say?
Well, it's part question, part for the debate, really. I agree entirely with the wording on the motion. But what I would just like to have clarified is that if single occupant homes in this district offer accommodation to Ukrainian refugees, that they won't lose their discount on their council tax, as has happened in certain parts of the country. The council itself will get £10,500 per refugee to help with education, health, etc. But the occupant of the house who is giving sanctuary to Ukrainian refugees is in danger in quite a lot of places of losing their discount off their council tax, which is a 25% discount for single occupancy.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yeah, Councillor Hinton raises an absolutely valid point, which is that concern that if our local residents take in somebody from abroad, from Ukraine, that there is that risk. I have taken from the sentiment that this council has expressed on numerous occasions in relation to what's going on in Ukraine, that you wouldn't wish us to apply that, i.e. you would ask us not to remove the single person discount. I'm taking that as read, and therefore we would apply that policy accordingly. If that needs a formal decision, then I will liaise with the monitoring officer, and we'll make that formal decision in due course. If it's something that officers can just do, then we will go away and do that, unless I hear strong views to the contrary, but I suspect I won't.
Thank you, Arthur. I'd now like to continue with the debate. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, it's a debate and a question at the same time. So I totally support the motion that you've done, and I also support what you said in your opening address about supporting the Homes for Ukraine refugees. But what I would ask you to do, what I'd ask the council to do, because I have a number of people in Shotley and indeed on the whole of the stunning Shotley Peninsula who have already applied to take refugees. I've already got businesses that want to accommodate refugees and give them work, and they've applied online and they've heard absolutely nothing. So please, will you tell your masters in Whitehall to get their finger out and get this sorted so these people can get here?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Jan Osborne? Don't wish to. Right. Any other on this debate? Sorry? Oh, yeah. Councillor Ward, do you wish to add anything?
Just in response to Councillor Davis, that message is being heard loud and clear. All local authorities are somewhat frustrated in the fact that we don't yet have detailed instructions on how we can help with that process. We are immensely frustrated, and we will, as soon as we get some more clarity from government, take our full part in helping to match those that are offering accommodation with those that need it, and also, of course, as you quite rightly point out, in terms of finding jobs for them, because we all know there are lots of job vacancies here, and we would love as many Ukrainians as possible to come here and fill those job vacancies. And as a council, we would do everything we can to support that, as long as the government does give us the assistance and the authority to do that.
Just a request on the basis of that, when that does happen, would it be possible for it to be communicated to all members so that we're aware and also able to advise people on perhaps how the government scheme, I know I've had phone calls and other people have about various possibilities, and again, lack of information coming forward. So if we do get any information, could it be disseminated through the council? Thank you.
Chief Executive would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been some guidance published by government. It doesn't go as far as I suspect all of us want it to do. We'll make sure that that's circulated in any event, and then as that comes through, circulate any further information and guidance. That's without saying.
Thank you. I'd now like to go to the vote, so I'll now ask the Corporate Manager Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Dale, are you it won't go, thank you. And Councillor Dawson, are you? That's 4, okay, lovely, thank you. Chair, that voting is 27-4, that's unanimous.
Thank you, that is carried.
No, it's 25-4, sorry.
I'd now like to go to item 16B to consider the motion of notice received from Councillor Jameson. Councillor Jameson, would you like to move your motion?
Thank you. I put this motion through originally with Ukraine in mind, obviously, and at the time I wasn't aware of Councillor Ward's motion. But I think it's still worthwhile motion. The Ukrainian crisis is just the latest of many humanitarian crises across the world. We have Afghanistan, we've still got Yemen, Syria, numerous countries in Africa, and we don't know where the next crisis is coming from. So the City of Sanctuary or Council of Sanctuary, there's various names. A quarter of local authorities are now signed up to be a Council of Sanctuary, and it's an umbrella organisation whose mission is to provide coordination and support for councils, for local community groups, networks, to make sure that when we are putting together policies, when we are thinking about, for example, what was given to me was leisure, we think about people seeking sanctuary in this country, people whose first language may not be English, and we need to put that, they work with us, we sign up, and they'll sit down with us and go through that and work with us, set up panels, to set up a panel to sit down with us and work through our policies and how they work for people who seek sanctuary in this country and within our district. So that's why I thought it's still worthwhile putting this forward. I mean, it can help, it can sort of work alongside the previous motion, but going forward, I mean, you sign up for 3 years and then you reapply after the 3 years, and it sort of embeds people who seek sanctuary within all our policies. And as I say, a quarter of local authorities have signed up. Ipswich already a city of sanctuary, and I think it would be worthwhile if we signed up and sat down with the group to it'd be a big benefit for our council. Sorry.
Jameson. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Owen.
Hi, yeah, I'll reserve the right to speak afterwards. Reserve the right to
Says the
speak
result.
afterwards.
Yep, thank you. Now move to debate. Councillors will only be allowed to speak once for 3 minutes, and this will be timed. Who would like to start the debate? Councillor Ward.
Yeah, I'd just say a few things. I noticed that the motion itself refers to the City of Sanctuary, and I know Councillor Jameson mentioned Council of Sanctuary, and I've had a look at the website that he's provided a link to, and it does use the phrase Council of Sanctuary, and I think that is far more appropriate. It's more inclusive. City of Sanctuary does tend to suggest that we're not worthy of being communities of sanctuary, but clearly we are. We're living in an increasingly dangerous world. That's quite obvious to all of us. There's so many problems, and we are fortunate to live in one of the best places, best parts of one of the best countries in the world, one of the most welcoming countries, one of the freest countries, and one of the most tolerant countries. So I have no problems with this motion either. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any other wish to go into the debate? Councillor Owen, would you like to...
Well, yeah, if there's no debate, I think this is a very well worth cause, and I believe that there's a lot of problems in the world and we should help them. So.
Councillor Jameson, is there anything you wish to add?
No, thanks, Chair.
Then I shall proceed to go to the vote, and I will now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That is now showing in blue for councillors to cast their vote. Chair, we have the results of the vote. It's 22 for and 3 abstentions. So that is carried.
That is carried, councillors. I'd just like to add a few comments regarding the meeting of our next council meeting, which will be Wednesday. Please take note, it's Wednesday, the 25th of May. So, is everybody happy with that? Yeah. So, 27th, 25th of May, yeah?